We're now joined also via Zoom by Dan Perry, former Europe and Middle East editor of the Associated Press. Good evening, Dan. You were just here a short while ago, and then you left, and then this huge story broke as you were driving home. I know you have a lot to say about it. I guess let's just start with why now and why?
Emily, I'm not a Netanyahu whisperer. The only possible answer to why now is because he wants to make a point about how powerful he is and how he can do whatever on earth he wants. Because let me say this, we are right now in Israel, all of us and our families expecting a potential Iranian attack. And there had been talk of an Iranian attack coming before the U.S. election. But of course, the Iranians don't want to help Trump get elected. And that's a whole complex equation. So there are people who actually think that the Iranians might attack when the polls close in America. Netanyahu chooses 2 hours, 3 hours before to fire his defense minister, projecting an incredible amount of weakness on the part of Israel. This is a moment when so much is at stake, with the hostage negotiations, with the war in Gaza, with a possible arrangement in Lebanon, with potentially the day after the U.S. election, trying to mobilize the United States into joining Israel in some kind of united front against the Iranians to get them to back off of their project to quickly move to a nuclear weapon and to amplify the proxy project around the Middle East. Gallant is central to all of this because Netanyahu runs a far-right government that has no credibility in the U.S. and really not much in the Israeli public. And Gallant is the one person who has good relations with the Defense Department in the U.S., even with the State Department in the U.S., and with the administration of Biden, which will still be in power until January 21st, to choose this day to fire the defense minister when, for all we know, the Iranians will attack in 2 hours.
Yeah.
It is reckless to the point of mind bending. And if you think about why this is happening, what the foundation for all this is, Ariel Kahana is right. Netanyahu and Gallant don't get along. And Gallant is a bit of an opposition within the government. I understand all that. But the true thing is, to keep the coalition together, Netanyahu needs to pass the draft evasion law for the Haredi youth, who currently account for almost a quarter of the youth in Israel that should be drafted, and in 2 generations will be half. And this is when the army is missing tens of thousands of people, and as a consequence of that, regular non-Haredi Israeli reservists have been serving 200 and 250 days of reserve duty in the past year. This is insanity. And it's because of the deficit in people to join the army. This is the moment when, to satisfy his coalition partners, Netanyahu has to pass the draft evasion law to formalize the non-drafting of the Haredim. And it was well known that Gallant won't go along with it because he is responsible. Now, there is so much to be said here. There's so much that is on the table. If the war ends, the edifice that the U.S. is trying to build for Israel, of a day after in Gaza, and of a normalization pact with Saudi Arabia, a raid against Iran, with the support of the West, there's so much money on the table. To think that all this is being thrown away, and it's not just about Yoav Gallant's firing, but that's part of it, because the government refuses to go along with any of this. This is all being thrown away in aid of not drafting the Haredim and keeping the coalition together for the government's survival for another 2 minutes. It is unbelievable. This is a case of, I hate to, veer from analysis to opinion, but honestly, in my opinion, this is selling Israel's strategic interest down the river for a slight political gain. It is genuinely shocking. And I wonder how it will look to history if the Iranians indeed attack Israel in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Oh, just horrible thought to even think about. Also, this decision, I mean, will affect the relationship with the United States, especially the prime minister's relationship, like you said, given that Gallant was kind of a go-to guy, a sensible guy for Biden and for Harris. So the outcome of the election could also be very, pivotal in how it reflects this decision.
Absolutely. Look, Biden will be in power for the next 2.5 months. That's a given. And my guess is he's angry, not just about the firing of Gallant, but in general about everything. And politics have prevented Biden from taking a very clear step in all directions. I mean, also against Netanyahu, but also against in the other direction. For example, against Iran. They've been paralyzed by the politics of it because of the Muslim voters in Michigan and the Jewish voters in Pennsylvania. This is well-worn ground. Biden, for the next 2.5 months, could do many interesting things. Um, Now, who wins the election? I mean, Harris would be a continuation of Biden, and she would still support Israel, but my guess is she would be increasingly at loggerheads with Netanyahu, same as the Israeli security establishment that Gallant represents. It's okay to continue the war because everyone wants Hezbollah and Hamas to be dislodged, but to do so with any absence of any strategic view of how to do it and what comes after, because the far right won't let Netanyahu engage in any diplomatic activity whatsoever, this is going to lead to a crisis with the Harris administration if she should be elected. Meanwhile, if Trump is elected, I know many people in Israel think he's going to support Netanyahu no matter what. I wouldn't quite be so sure because Trump is capricious and he's impatient and he's simplistic. And whereas normally these things are bad for domestic or international politics, in the Middle East, it may be good. And I think it may be good for Israel, but it won't necessarily be good for Netanyahu because I do suspect that if one wishes the U.S. administration to read the Riot Act both to the Iranians but also to the current Israeli government, that is more likely to happen from Trump than from Harris. By which I mean, I can envision Trump saying to Netanyahu, end the war. Now, I'm going to help you. I'm going to get Qatar and Egypt to put the squeeze on Hamas because they must give up, and that is clear. But you got to do your part, which is to create a plausible narrative going forward. And that involves the PA or some version of it returning the power in Gaza, and Israel saying, yeah, we don't want to occupy Gaza forever, and nor do we want to settle it. Now, those obvious words cannot be said right now by Netanyahu because either he doesn't want to or because the right wing is blackmailing him. But I can see Trump saying, I've run out of patience. I have no doubt that Biden is also run out of patience, but I have to say Biden has projected some weakness. There's a phrase in Hebrew, you spit on me and I call it rain. That applies a little bit to Biden.
Right.
I'm not so sure it applies to Kamala Harris, but she is the continuity candidate. Either way, the firing of Gallant at a moment where that is as reckless as this is, and I'm choosing my words carefully because one could say more damning things than reckless, but at a moment of such recklessness, I think we can see that the current situation really is increasingly unsustainable. So it's quite a drama, indeed. And I have to think right now it's on hold until we figure out what happens in the U.S. elections.
Right.
But after that,
It's going to be a long 24 hours. Dan Perry, I thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.